नमस्ते। स्वागत है आप सभी का कही सुनी की इस कड़ी में। आज हम बात करेंगे रंजीत राधाकृष्णन के साथ। रंजीत जी ने अभी रिसेंटली रिलीज्ड बुक आर्या में एक स्टोरी लिखी है। वो स्टोरी कम कविता ज्यादा है। सो लेट अस talk about the unnamed woman in Mahabharat. This is the woman who appears in the chapter called Shalya Parv. That is when Shalya becomes the commander and he is dead. After his death, Balram comes back from his pilgrimage and he is there to witness the epic duel between Bhim and Duryodhan. Before that epic duel happens, Balram recounts his journey, his all the pilgrims that places that he has visited. And during that conversation, he talks about one place, and that is the place that became a tirth because of this woman. And that is the story that Ranjit has decided to tell as part of this anthology of remarkable Vedic women. And why we named this chapter, this episode, The Unnamed Woman from Mahabharat, is because while she was such a remarkable woman that her tap or her strength basically made that one place a tirth big enough for Balaram to visit and pay his respect. And that woman was not even named in the epic Mahabharat. That probably tells us more about the women of ancient times than anything else, that this was such a remarkable feat that was available and achievable by women of those times. And it is not that the women were subjugated or subjected to oppression, which is something that we are made to believe. So let me bring in Ranjit here. So welcome, Ranjit. We are happy to have you here. So let's first talk about how you decided to tell the stories from our ancient epics and why you had picked up this mantle to tell these stories and why you think it is important.
Okay. Namaste. Good evening to everybody. This journey, I think, started with Unsung Valor. That was a previous anthology that came out from Indica, and the curator was Sai Swarupa Iyer. And that was during the lockdown time when we had COVID raging all across the world. And I was following her thread on Twitter, fascinating thread about the battles that happened during the 18 days of the Mahabharata war.
She has used an Excel sheet also in that thread.
Yeah. So that was a superb thread. And it was so fascinating that I was hooked onto it, and I kept pestering her to, update it. So suddenly, out of the blue, she announced that, she's doing this anthology, and there were certain specifications given. You will have to talk about one day of the war, of one particular character, and what happened, and how can you bring out the character of that person. So there were a list of names given, and I picked Shakuni because, frankly, I thought nobody else would pick him. Everybody would most probably go for the good guys or the heroes. And Shakuni ka to koi option koi bhi nahi lega. So
I think someone picked Bhagdat. Deepak did, right?
Sorry?
Someone picked Bhagdat also in Unsung Valor.
Yeah. And Jayadrat was also there. So there were a lot of people thinking like me. So I wrote the story, and I, when you want reassurance, the first person you go to is your mother. So I gave it to my mother and said, "Pad lo, ab batao, acha hai ki nahi?" And she loved it. And she said, "You send it to her." And I didn't send it to her. So it was only a week later that my mom comes back and asked me, "Did you send it?" And I said, "No, I wasn't sure about it." She said, "No, send it right now." And that was like 1 day or 2 days before the deadline. So I sent it, and I said, "Okay, fine. There'll be, lakhs of people who are, writing, and let's just forget about it." And I got an email suddenly from her saying that it's been selected. So that's how the story started. And Shakuni was, I think, pretty well received. So it was only on that one day that I focused upon. There wasn't much about that encounter between him and Sahadeva in the Mahabharata itself. So it allowed me to build a little bit more on that. So then Indica came up with more anthologies, and I got the confidence to start writing. So I've written for a upcoming anthology too, which is Aditi Banerjee, which is on the lesser known characters of Mahabharat, and I've written on Jujutsu in that. That's yet to come out. I think it should be out in a couple of months. And when Shiv Kumar started this one, my first preference was another character. We can talk about her later.
We will talk about it. Yes.
Yeah. So I came across an article on her, and that article made me completely enraged with what was going on there, and I wanted to write a counter. So something made me check with Shiv Kumar, whether I can do this. And he was like, I'm looking at positive characters here. I don't want this one here for this anthology. Pick somebody else. So I went to the Indica site and I was looking at the options that were given there. But any option that I thought of, that anger I had with that article was not leaving me. I was, mentally, I was still stuck there. So then I came across this Vriddha Kanya name, and I knew a little bit of the story. I didn't know the whole thing at all. And I looked it up, and it was a complete blank state. I have the beginning of the story and I have the ending. What happens in between is completely blank. And that gave me complete freedom to try and envision the story how I wanted it to. So writing it as a poem is a completely instinctual decision, because what happened was, when I read the story and I read what was happening there, the first feeling, the first image that came to mind, आपको पता है कि नहीं, I don't know, there is this classical dance form in Kerala called Kathakali. So you have beautiful makeup, beautiful costume, and as a child, I was lucky that I was allowed backstage, where the artists are putting on their makeup. That is a completely transformative experience, because they are lying down on the ground. They go into a sort of trance to become the character, and there's a person sitting next to them and drawing those that painting their face and putting on their costume and all that. And they come out, and there's this big screen, and that drops, and you have the characters in front of you, and they're enacting the play, and towards the side there are the instruments and the people singing. And this is performed usually in olden times in front of this big oil lamp. So we have something like that in Karnataka also, called the Yakshagana. So this was the image that came into my mind. So I wanted to bring that sense back, that sense of a performative play, of a sense of a song and scripture. You're performing something that's written down by the great sages of the past, and I wanted that kind of an ambience. So I thought a poem would be better suited to this. So I wrote the poem. तो जब मैं आपको अभी explain कर रहा हूँ, तो you will think that this guy had it all figured out in the beginning itself. ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. मैं क्या लिख रहा था उसका पूरा समझ तो मुझे तब नहीं था. तो दिमाग का जो वोल्टेज है ना, तो थोड़ा कम था, तो वो ट्यूबलाइट चमकी नहीं. तो whoever was giving me that, whether it is my subconscious or some adrishya shakti or whatever it is, it knew that this guy is not going to understand much right now. तो बेटा तू बस लिख अब, तुम्हारी समझ में it'll come later, not right now. So I wrote it freestyle, and I submitted it to Shiv Kumar, and I asked him if this is okay, and he said, okay, I'll take this, but you will have to do it in rhyme. So that's when I was rewriting the poem in rhyme, when I understood why I actually wrote the things I wrote. So making it a poem and writing it the way was completely instinctual. When I sat down to write, I just wrote the introduction to the characters of the Mahabharat, and I think I finished that in one session. So I wrote it and I moved on, because this was a complete break from the character I had in mind, and it was so fresh that I was so excited to write this. And this is the first time I'm attempting a poem, and this was a narrative poem. इससे पहले आप अनसंग वैलर देखोगे तो पहले पेज पे एक डेडिकेशन है before the anthology starts. So I had written that down and sent it to Sai Swarupayar and asked if you want to use it, please do. And she said, yeah, great, I'll use it for the book. So that was the only published thing before this. So I was लिखते वक्त मैं बिल्कुल नर्वस ही नहीं था. So it's only when the time came to publication that I started getting nervous as to whether I've actually, fulfilled what a poem should be or not. So rest now. I mean, I think the readers can take over.
Oh, no, it was really fascinating the way you have described it because when I went into reading that story, तो मुझे लगा अंग्रेजी में कविता थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट होगा पढ़ना समझना क्योंकि
हाँ.
मतलब हिंदी की कविता तो मुझे बहुत अच्छी समझ में आती है एंड आई एम लाइक फैन ऑफ हिंदी पोएट्स एंड पोएट्रीज बाय देम लेकिन अंग्रेजी में कविता मुझे लगा यार ये मुझे समझ में नहीं आएगी and I had that hesitation going into reading your story and that too after reading Gargi and Maitreyi because they
Yeah.
are like philosophically very heavy stories already तो मुझे
True.
जब मैंने लेकिन वो पढ़ा तो इट मतलब व्हेन आई स्टार्टेड रीडिंग एंड स्टार्ट्स विद द डेडिकेशन टू the Vyasa and so I mean it starts very basically like the way Mahabharat has started, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then you start getting into each and every character that this is the story of Arjun, this is the story of Bhim and all that. And the rhyme is easy to understand, the words are easy to understand. It's not like those old English British poems who used like the ancient English language and which was difficult to understand just for the sake of rhyming. So I could
Yeah.
understand it, and then I started enjoying it. So it's very beautifully written. So whoever was giving you inspiration has inspired you well, and has basically made you write this beautiful poetry. And not many good English poets are coming out of India. So it's good that you have written it in that way, and you have touched upon why you talked about why you decided to write in the form of poetry. But how did you choose? I mean, how, the structure when you said that Shiva said it has to be in the rhyming.
Yeah.
How did you go about? Was it a very calculated thing, or was it also again some motivation you got that you can't explain?
Okay. So there were two challenges in front of me. One was, since I knew the beginning of the story, that she was born to her father, she didn't have a mother, just like Draupadi. And what the ending of the story was, what happens in between? How do I show who Chandaliya Duhita is? What is her character? And I have the four Purusharthas to play with also here. So the only points I had was, it is mentioned that this is one of the last tirthas that Balram goes to. And the person who comes and tells her that no, right now you cannot go to heaven is Narada. So at the beginning of the Mahabharat itself, you have Brahmadev coming and talking to Vedavyasji and telling him that if you want a scribe, you have to talk to Bhagavan Ganesh. He's the only one who can write this. So here, Narad Muni comes and tells her that no, there's something that you have to do. And all this is happening on the banks of the Saraswati. Now, we don't have the river now. I took that river as a metaphor. So, Balarama has traveled all the way from Dwaraka, all the way up to a tirth that is one of the last in his journey. So, I took it as a metaphor of, from the ocean of samsara, there is a soul, an Atma that has traveled all this way. Saraswati is the river of enlightenment, and she has reached to somewhere right at the end. And she's got maybe one step more to go. So this is how I imagined it in my mind. But how to bring out her character? This was what was, worrying me a little bit. So I read on what happens after he passes by this. He is told the story of King Kuru and how he was tilling the field. And that is when, the dimag ki batti tab voltage aaya, tab jali chamki mere liye ki I understood what it was that time. Because it was a brilliant juxtaposition by Vedavyasji. It is, every time you read this epic, there's something that new that it throws up to you. And I had
Yeah, I
not
agree.
noticed this in my first three readings at all. So he's telling you about the tilling of field by King Kuru, and what has happened. He has come to know of the death of Shalya, at Chandala Duhita's Tirth. So there is a reaping of souls that's happening at that place, at Kurukshetra. So, and he's put these two together brilliantly in the thing, and it's when I noticed the juxtaposition that I understood what I have to do. So what happens after this? The war is practically over. There is the killing of the Pandavas by Ashwatthama left. But what happens after that? The Pandavas rule because of Gandhari's curse. Krishna passes on. And the Pandavas decide to give it all up and move. They start off on their Mahaprasthana. And this lady is actually at her Mahaprasthana herself. When Narada comes and tells her this, that you're too old, and she thinks she's too old to find a groom for herself now, but she accepts her lapse. And she's ready at that age to try and remedy it. In a sense, her journey is the journey of somebody who can be considered the hero of the Mahabharata. Here is this man who was the rightful heir to the throne, who was deprived of it, given only half the kingdom, then cheated out of it. His brothers and all these warriors fought a war for him. He rules and he gives it all up. And when he starts to ascend the mountain, he's so single-pointed about it. Some may even call it ruthless, that he doesn't even look back when they start falling one by one. And when he reaches right on top, he's subject to a test again. So I saw Chandaliya Duhita at the same position that he was there. So what happens after this? When he's invited into the chariot to take him to heaven, he says, I will not come because I want the dog with me. So in this story, I think the whole crux of the lady's character is in that line which she says, I will try and remedy the mistake I've made. I will try and find a groom, but I will not marry an unworthy man. So in Chandaliya Duhita's story, the dog is those two lines. So for me, those two lines are the character of Chandaliya Duhita. That even though Swarga is just an arm's length away, she's not going to compromise for that. She will marry, but her husband will be a worthy man. So she sets out on this, and that device for me was very important for the structure of the poem, because it enabled me to get Narada into the story. So Narada would not have been a witness to what she was doing, and he would not have given the blessing unless she had said this. And the tests that go through with the women coming and offering something, the lady of pleasure coming, I have shown her dharma with those two statements. Then I have shown the artha component of it. And towards the end, I have shown the kama proportion of it. And then last, the moksha. So I deliberately used the word 8 in the rhyme, because if you see, it's the 9th day that she ascends. So this is like a Navaratri kind of thing, allusion that I wanted to bring. And during the Navaratri thing, 8th day is when you do the Kanya Puja.
Ashtami, yes.
Yes. So she's already known as Vridya Kanya. That's why I played on that number 8. I don't know how many people picked it up, but that's what I wanted to do. So when Shiv Kumar said that he needed me to rhyme, I was at that time, I think I mentioned this to Madhurima ji also. There was a book that I had that was just lying down here. I hadn't touched it for years together, and I just picked it up, and it was The Greatness of Lord Saturn by Robert Swoboda. And I was just flipping through this. वो पढ़ के क्या उतर गया मेरे इसमें पता नहीं, but Shani Maharaj has made it into Jujutsu story also, and number 8 is supposed to be his number. That made it into my poem. So when I started searching for a rhyme, I found Ottava Rima, and that is a verse of 8 lines. I didn't want 12 lines, 16 lines, because it takes up almost the entire page. It's not just how what you write, how the poem looks on the page is also very important. I can't give the reader one bulk over there and expect him to read it. I have to break it up somewhere. So 8 fit perfectly to that. So it was an amazing coincidence that I had put an 8 already, and I hadn't thought of Ottava Rima then. And when I went searching, I found this. And this was used much earlier to write epic poetry. So I was really happy I found it.
Interesting. One more question I have about the story is how you arrived at the name, because the name is not mentioned in Mahabharat, and
Yeah.
I think there would have been one or two names floating around in your research. So, how you decided and how you thought that this is the right name for the story or for the character?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked me this question because I have to mention this. Vriddha Kanya is the name she's known by. And she's also called Kunigargi, probably after her father, because her father's name is Kunigarga. And she doesn't have a mother. It
Hmm.
was he had created herself with his yogic powers. So when I was researching this, I came across a particular link that went to academia.edu. And there was this one page there that said, Vriddha Kanya is Chandrila Duhita and she's a brahmacharini, was mentioned there. So I was, excited because I had not come across his name before. And I messaged Shiv Kumar and said, I found the name. I know what the character is called, and I don't think it's come out before. And I continued writing the poem. But when I went back to that link, it was no longer working. And I couldn't find, and I had forgotten to take the name of the person who had written that.
Okay.
So it's only just before the book came out that the link was active again. So I got in touch with the lady. She's a scholar based in Bengal. Her name is Supriya Banikpal.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, she's traveling abroad. So I emailed her. I even sent her a copy of the book. And I said, you've named my heroine. So, I'm very thankful to that. This is my humble homage to you. Please do tell me, how did you get this name? Where did you find it? What is the reference for it? So she's promised to
Hmm.
tell me when she's back. I guess another couple of weeks she should be back.
But the literal meaning is Shandilya's daughter, right? Duhita means
Yeah.
daughter. So Shandilya
Yes.
Duhita would literally mean daughter of Shandilya.
Yeah, which is why I mentioned in the note after that, probably that is the Gotra name that's been given to her.
Hmm.
I need to
Hmm.
find out from the lady how she arrived at this name. Uh,
Hmm.
what is curious is immediately after this Tirtha, when Balramji travels, there is an ascetic, a lady again, who's unnamed again. We just told that she's the daughter of Shandili, and she attained
Hmm.
heaven without marriage.
Okay.
Okay, so it's only after that he goes to Samanta Panchaka and gets the story of King Kuru. So you have two similar and dissimilar narratives happening one after the other. So which is why I was very
Both
curious as to how
related to
she got this name.
Shandilya.
Yeah. So how did she
Both.
get Shandilya Duhita for this
So
one?
so both of them could be Shandilya Duhita by that logic, right? Shandilya Duhita one, Shandilya
Yes.
Duhita two. So
Yeah.
and
So, but
in
she
terms of
specifically mentioned Kunigarga's daughter. So I was
hmm.
very curious, and I'm, very eager to know how she got this name.
So, before we move on to the questions that I have, there are a few questions from our audience. I will ask
Yeah.
one by one. So, one question is how challenging it was to write in the verse form compared to prose form, and in terms of the time and the effort that it required to compose it.
Okay. Uh, the beginning parts of the verse were, I mean, it just flowed because I was so excited in doing this project. And once I had that, sometimes, there are two kinds of writers. There are the plotters and the pantsers. Plotters are the people who plan everything down, the character arc, the story arc, what happens in every character chapter, which character is introduced in which chapter, all this. अगर वो novel लिख रहे हैं तो sometimes the plotting goes up to 10,000 words, and then they fill it up and complete the novel. And the pantsers are like, they have a broad idea and they just start writing. So I am somewhere in between. I have a fair idea of what to do, but this was completely new to me. So I knew the beginning and the ending. So that was my plotting. Everything else was pantsing only. So once I got through the introduction with the characters of the Mahabharat was when the challenge started. I knew what was the challenge, but writing that character like I spoke of, that required a little bit of time. Otherwise, I think it was pretty okay, and I was frankly a little surprised how fast I could finish it, because once Shiv Kumar told me to change from freestyle to rhyme, I think it took me 5 or 6 days to rewrite it and send it across. Because by then बैठ गया था idea, पता था कि क्या क्या हो रहा है,
So,
कहाँ से inspiration है इसका.
so
So
if you
once you
had to
get
replicate it, I'm saying, is it a replicable process, or is it something that is a one-time divine intervention that helped you go through it so smoothly?
no, I have a book coming out soon, and it's a story of Bhagwan Parshuram. So I have included songs in the book. So before this, I was writing verse before that. So there are
Okay.
certain junctures in the book where I wanted the song because there is something happening in that scene. I wanted the song to be sung there. So I have written, I think, 4 songs for the book. So I was doing this before I started. Maybe that's why I got the idea to write a poem. Uh, so to
So,
replicate it again in such a big form narrative, I don't know. I'm not sure
so,
because the songs in the
so
book are like, nice.
another question is about the timeline of this Shandilya Duhita story. If you, I mean, because Mahabharat probably does not give away too much about it.
Yeah.
Have you found any assessment about where it would have been situated in the timeline? It was obviously pre Balram, but before
Yes.
that, where it would be, who would be our contemporaries, probably, if you could.
Okay, so we know his father's name. Father's name is Galava, and he appears in the Madhavi story. So
Yes.
I don't know if this is the same person. And there is also a reference somewhere that he was a friend of King Pratipa. So this
Okay.
is
So not that
going
old.
really far. Yeah,
I mean,
but
just before Shantanu, right?
yeah.
So
So
we
so
know
no,
the characters of the contemporaries.
yeah. So how many years back is I haven't calculated that. I don't know if that is the same person. There are so many
Hmm.
people with the same names in our epics. So, but he has a son. But it's mentioned that he had a son called Sringavat who married Vriddha Kanya. So I'm guessing it is the same person. And this
Yeah.
he's supposed to be the son of Vishwamitra. So we have a
So
connection with
I
Vishwamitra.
mean, so Galav may not be the right reference point because there are too many Galav, but Prateep would be a much
Yes,
easier reference point because we don't know many Prateep. At least in Mahabharat, we don't know any
true.
other than Shantanu's father, right? So,
Yes,
and
yes,
if it is Shantanu's father, then in the timeline when Balram would have visited there, it would have been a much recent Tirth. It would not have been that ancient from Balram's perspective, I am assuming.
true, true, true.
Moving on to the next question. The next question is you had mentioned that you had someone else in mind when you heard about this call for the stories. And you also mentioned about your motivation why you wanted to write that story, right? Because you came across some garbage article and you wanted to write as a rebuttal to that.
Yes.
So my question is not exactly about what the story was that we might come to later. My
Huh,
question is more about this: how important it is to rebutting these kind of narratives that are out there, and
huh.
why it is so important.
Uh, I think we should rebut it. There is a whole lot of stuff that happens on Twitter that says, "Why do you bother with these people? Let them write whatever crap they have to." I'm sorry, I disagree with that. We have to rebut these stories that come in. So before this anthology came out, maybe a couple of months before the anthology was called for, I came across an article on the net on Shurpanaka, where she was presented as a feminist icon. And I mean, looking at the link, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I clicked, went in there, and read the article, and I was shocked beyond belief as to, at the narrative that was there. I mean, it was presented, it was, warped so badly to try and show a woman who is willing to, go after another woman's husband, willing to kill that woman, and take her as a feminist icon was something that that really See, I don't mind people looking at stories through a feminist lens or whatever lens that you have to look at. It's good as long as you are able to bring out facets which we have not seen before. So I don't have a problem with the lens you're using, but the lens you use should not be something that puts cataracts on the reader's eyes, and blinds them from what the truth is. That should not be the purpose of it. So this is something that you're coming across, many times online now. I'm sure, Bharti ji would have told you about the glorification of Karna that happens. Now
Yeah,
Ravan
she
has
is
also started a little
her
bit.
favorite topic.
And that's the way it is going. It looks like a perennial, favorite now, because they still are not giving up. I saw the question
Yeah,
that came last time about Karna's Vishwaroop, and that was astounding.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I saw that too.
yeah. So it's not about the lens that you're looking at with, but if your lens is only, looking at something to drive a particular agenda, then we have a problem with it, and we need to bring the facts in front. When I was studying in school, I was told that Ashoka the Great converted to Buddhism after the Kalinga War.
Hmm.
Now I find out that he was Buddhist 8 years before that. So
And
this,
Kalinga War was more to convert the Kalinga people to Buddhism than
yes,
more like a political war. So it was
yeah,
more of a religious war, probably.
yeah. So the good thing
So,
with anthologies and many people writing this way is that now we have to set the record straight. You've already seen in this book on Madhavi, you've seen on Shakuntala, the portrayal is completely opposite to what we have written. And we have to do
yeah.
that because not only are they misrepresenting our characters, they are now started with a new kind of myth making themselves. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, because there is this controversy that erupted in Kerala about something called the breast tax, which
Hmm.
they don't have any record of. And there was
Hmm.
this character that they have imagined up called Nangeli, who
Okay.
protested against it by cutting her breasts off. Nobody, I hadn't heard of this character since,
Hmm.
till maybe 2011, 2012. I hadn't heard about her before this. So I checked with my mother. So, and I was astounded to learn that when she was studying, nothing of Kerala history was taught to her. She
Hmm.
was born and she studied in Kerala. So she hardly
Hmm.
knows. She knows a few names like Ravi Varma, Martanda Varma. She knows a few names like that.
Hmm.
But when was this? How many kingdoms were there? Who were the kings that ruled? Absolutely nothing is taught to them. And this was given to them as this is a proven fact. This is like the Aryan invasion theory. This is fact.
Hmm.
No evidence found, nothing, but ये fact है. आपको
Hmm.
मानना ही पड़ेगा. So
Pre-decided.
yeah. So when this is what is going on, it's very important that
Hmm.
we say people who don't want to read the original text, or who find it very, some people are really scared of approaching a text that's so thick, or should I really go there? If we are able to do that and we can make those stories accessible to people, at least we
Hmm.
have a set of people who can counter this. It can't be just us. We have to have a few people who know the facts, and we can give it to them, present it to them in a good manner. I think that's very, very important right now at the stage
So,
where we are.
my personal experience has been honestly till few years back I also had not read any of the unabridged versions, and my source of stories or knowledge started with my aunt at a very young age, and she was from a family of priests, so she had access to all these scriptures, and she at least gave us the undistorted versions when we were young.
Yeah,
But I also was like the narrative, popular narrative that is out there, and I did not even try to seek the truth, right? But when I started reading and trying to find out things, I kept getting deeper into it, and then I started realizing that how much falsehood and how much myth making has happened around these scriptures. And then many people come about and say, okay, this is creative liberty, this is the such and such, this is subjective truth, and all these words they throw around.
yeah,
My only problem with this is that see, some people who comment to us, ki, okay, why are you so bothered? This is just
Hmm.
somebody trying to write a story on that setup.
Hmm.
These are probably wise people to know the difference. But
Hmm.
most of the people who are reading these stories, who are buying these books, they assume that they have read Mahabharata or they have read
Yes.
Ramayana by reading
True.
these books. And if you ask them, so I met a person, very educated. He is running his own startup. So it was a event for some VC, and all the many most of the guys were entrepreneurs. So this person, when he found out what I do, he told me, "Oh, I have a good understanding of our ancient literature. I have read
Hmm.
Palace of Illusion and Jaya."
Oh, okay.
And
Hmm.
I just said, then you must download our app and especially focus on the Mythbusters series because
Okay.
then you need it more than anybody else. So I said
Yeah.
that if you had not read any of these literature, you would have probably had better understanding of our ancient
True.
epics than you do
True.
now, because you have now
Yeah.
moved in a wrong direction, right? You are running
True.
towards
True.
an opposite direction. And the
Yeah.
biggest disadvantage as a society we face because of these myth makings is that, as they say, that you want to mimic your hero, you want to be like your heroes.
True.
So it is important that we have right heroes and we do not have these anti-heroes or do not glorify people like Karn, people like Duryodhan, people like Ravan, and create a
Hmm.
victimhood syndrome around them and try to say, okay, they did this because they were a victim of so and so situation.
Hmm.
And in fact, today itself, I was having a conversation about this Simanti's book on the Yudhishthir that has come.
Yeah.
I was talking about it, and there was like there is a glorification of Yudhishthir. I said, problem is that I have no worry with glorification of Yudhishthir
Hmm.
because he is a person who deserves to be glorified.
Yes. Hmm.
Right. So you,
Yeah.
and the problem happens is that when you are criticizing, you find one fault in that entire 100 years life of Yudhishthir and say, देखो किसने गलत किया, इसको ये ठीक आदमी नहीं है. And while
Correct.
you find one good thing in another person's 70, 80 years of life, 100 years of life, and you say, देखो उसके साथ एक बुरी चीज हो गई इसलिए वो सब 100 साल justified है, और दूसरे
Huh.
आदमी को. So basically your standards of judging these characters are also basically driven by the lens you are wearing.
True.
Correct. So if you
True.
are wearing a lens where you want to show that India was a casteist society, we were discriminating against people, then thousand devils of Karna are like maaf.
Correct.
And then
Correct.
Dronacharya not teaching him Divyastra is the biggest issue of the society.
Yeah.
Without getting into the details of the event, like Dronacharya did not even teach Brahmastra properly to his own son.
Yeah.
Correct. So that is,
Correct.
he was a great judge of character. He knew Ashwatthama was prone to outburst, anger outburst.
Yeah.
So no, knowledge of Divyastra is not a privilege that you have. It's a responsibility that has been thrown upon you with great, like अभी स्पाइडरमैन के ताऊ जी बोलते हैं ग्रेट पावर कम्स ग्रेट रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, तो सब लोग ताली बजाते हैं.
हाँ.
हमारे
हाँ.
अश्वत्थामा
ठीक
के
है.
पिताजी बोलते हैं तो
Correct.
लोग बोलते बोलते हैं ये तो कास्टिस्ट आदमी है, ये सही आदमी नहीं
हाँ.
है. But
हाँ.
exactly he was telling the same thing, right? If I
Yeah.
teach you this, then you have to have certain qualities to not be able to misuse this knowledge.
Yeah.
Because a lot, and we have seen in Mahabharat what happens when it is misused, right?
True.
Ashwatthama basically did it, and he had to then suffer a curse for 3,000 years of suffering.
Yeah.
He did misuse it, right? So the
Yes.
possibility of them, in fact, Drona himself ended up misusing it. And then
Yeah.
Brihaspati and all these came to him, ki, okay, bahut ho gaya, ab bas karo.
हाँ.
That's literally happened when he decided to give up arms. I mean, that
Yeah.
entire Yudhishthir thing happened. But
Hmm.
this scene also is described that his
Yes.
ancestors came to him, ki, boss, you are misusing your power, now stop. So
Yeah.
I'm saying that when we basically repackage these texts or these stories, there is a sense of responsibility that anybody who is doing the job of repackaging should feel and should have. And I am seeing that many modern authors basically are writing about these events, these characters, without even bothering to read any version of unabridged Mahabharata. Now
Yes.
imagine, so basically you are telling an imaginary story,
Yes.
and you are presenting it as Mahabharat or as a part of Mahabharat, and that is
Yes.
where my problem is, right? So I'm assuming that you agree with me on this point, that
Complete.
this particular thing about being true to the original source and not distort it in either of the direction is the right way to approach it. And there should be some ethical standard that should be followed by people, by authors who are working on this. So I mean, if you have
Absolutely.
to add to this.
No, absolutely. Because I think uh, in this coming under this label of creative freedom and creative license, I think you're allowing people, to drive cars who don't even know which is, accelerator jante hai, brake nahi mal. So put it into gear, move forward. You don't know what else to do. So
Hmm,
I don't think creative liberty can be, an excuse for anything that you do. There is a
hmm,
story. There is when you're writing your story, your endeavor as a writer should be to get to the truth of that character and that story that you're writing. Now, if
hmm,
you are trying to do that with a particular kind of lens, great. But are you bringing that truth out? If you are
hmm.
falsifying stuff, if you are so enamored by a character that you're willing to, cut everybody else down to glorify this one, I'm sorry, I don't think that's creative liberty. We'll have to coin a new phrase for that, because
Hmm.
this is an imaginary figment from from your mind, and has nothing to do with the original Mahabharata or the Ramayana. So,
Hmm.
which is what irritated me so much, angered me so much about the Shurpanaka story, because
Hmm.
the situation was the same, the characters are the same, but here it is the three of them who are wrong, and this lady is absolutely right in doing this. यहाँ पे
Yeah,
my
I
body
mean,
by choice नहीं आया.
so I
अगर
mean,
राम
it is.
बोलते हैं तो ये नहीं, it's not valid. I'm sorry,
But
I'm
yeah,
not, I'm married, I'm not interested. So what is wrong? आप बोलते हो no means no, and suddenly you're going back and saying this lady is like, the feminist icon. It was unbelievable. I'm sure I have.
मेरे नो की वैल्यू आपके नो की वैल्यू से ज्यादा है, बेसिकली दैट्स
Huh,
व्हाट दे आर सेइंग. So
yeah.
that is the problem. I mean most of the these people who are termed at woke or activist kind of people,
Huh.
and my whole problem with any of these activists personally, and no offense to anyone, is basically when you start identifying as an activist and when it becomes your identity, you
Yeah.
start looking at that lens. I mean, everything with that lens. So if somebody identifies themselves as a caste warrior, उनको
Hmm.
हिंदुस्तान की सारी समस्याएं कास्टिज्म की वजह से ही दिखती हैं.
Huh.
जिसको अगर आप अपने आप को एक फेमिनिज्म वॉरियर की तरह देखते हो, आपको लगता है सारी समस्याएं दुनिया में वुमेन मेल फीमेल डिस्क्रिमिनेशन की वजह से ही है. एंड
Huh.
दैट इज, आई मीन, अगर आप इन्वायरमेंटलिस्ट बोलते तो आपको लगता है सारी प्रॉब्लम दुनिया में इसी वजह से है कि हम लोग इन्वायरमेंट डिस्ट्रॉय कर रहे हैं. So
True.
I mean that happens with when you don't have any other thing, right? So you
Yeah.
care about all these factors. Most
True.
people do, honestly, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
come across regular normal people, and they all feel about these stuff, and most of them are on the right. I mean, on the not the right wing, left wing in the political terms. It's more like in the
Yeah.
context of right and wrong, but they don't it's not their identity, right? When you have
True.
nothing else to do, like for example, I'm just throwing the name, like Greta Thunberg. Her whole
Huh.
identity is being an environment warrior.
Yes.
She has nothing more beyond that. So I mean, if she stops looking at things with the lens of this environment, then she loses her whole identity, and she
True.
can't allow that to happen. So it's in her best interest to keep talking about this every now and then, and make sure that this is the only thing people talk about or people care about. And this same thing happens with the modern day authors who are trying to impose today's problems on ancient literature, and then they basically try to see that, okay, आज कास्टिज्म है तो उधर भी हुआ होगा, कर्ण के साथ शायद यही हुआ रहा होगा, right?
Huh.
And
Huh.
then once they do that, we use this literature as an evidence कि देखो पहले भी होता.
Huh.
And the
Correct.
common people, the common audience that is out there, they can't tell the difference कि what
Yes.
happened first, right? कि पहले इन्होंने प्रोजेक्शन किया और फिर उसके बाद उसको एज एविडेंस प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं. तो ये सीक्वेंस ऑफ इवेंट इज, एवरीबody doesn't read or doesn't go through this kind of thought process, right? And I am assuming that would have been the motivation on the next that you are working on. So
Yes.
maybe you can talk a bit about that. You touched upon it. I mean, I don't know how much you are allowed to talk about it, but I believe that it's an interesting project. And you mentioned that you have written few songs also in that. So maybe you can touch upon a bit.
Okay. But before that, I just want to make a brief mention about Arya. With all this victimhood that's been happening here, you have 10 stories of 10 women who are put into the most extraordinary circumstances, and not one of them was playing victim.
Correct.
They are so
We
strong.
actually we don't have many. I mean, I have not found any woman character, to be honest. Forget
Yeah,
many. Any woman character in either Ramayana or Mahabharat who have cried victim on any situation, and they have been through extreme situations, extreme hardships.
correct.
And
Correct.
pick any woman in Arya, right? They
Yeah,
have been subjected to tests, all of them.
all of
Some
them. Yes.
intellectually, some I mean the physically, some socially. All of them have gone through extreme situations, and instead of crying that see मेरे साथ ही जैसे this
हाँ,
is one of my favorite quotes, जब कर्ण का रथ का पहिया धस जाता है
हाँ,
जमीन में and
हाँ.
he starts reminding everybody of dharma, Sri Krishna
Yeah.
बेसिकली टेल्स हिम कि तुम्हारे जैसे आदमी को जब ये सिचुएशन आई तो धर्म ही याद आता है, अपने कर्म
हाँ,
नहीं याद आते. देन यू हैव
हाँ.
द टेंडेंसी टू ब्लेम एवरीवन एल्स देन योर ओन थिंग्स,
Yes.
which doesn't happen with any woman character, right? Male character, I have
True.
told you one example already,
Yes. Yes.
but
Yeah.
female I have none.
True.
This is
True.
one remarkable thing about our ancient women, that
Yeah.
none of them have played a victim कि मेरे साथ ही ऐसा क्यों होता है.
हाँ, हाँ.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, not a problem. So that's why I recommend everybody should buy and read Arya. You're going to get the right perspective and the correct narrative that's happening.
Just to show
So,
it to people.
so
It's behind you.
this is the one. It's setting the narrative straight. So go ahead and read this. So the next project is my first novel. It's on Bhagwan Parshuram, and it's been in the works for quite some time now. And finally, looks like there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So I expect it to be out maybe in the next couple of months. It's been with the publisher for some time, and there have been some hiccups on the way. So there is this Puranic story of Bhagwan Parshuram, and there is a whole lot of folklore also, especially from North Karnataka. I stay in Karnataka, so I have a little bit of knowledge about that. So this was something that story that stayed with me for a very long time. And when after Unsung Valor, Sai Swarupa Iyer said that, you guys have to attempt a novel at least now. And I think the first guy to do it was Deepak. He got Abhimanyu out. And then
Yes.
Bharati self-published a book. So it's been lying there with the publisher for quite some time. And they had to finish their backlog and all the stuff. But they've been very kind and very, encouraging. So hopefully in the next 2 or 3 months, that should come out. I've tried to give a completely different perspective on Bhagwan Parshuram. And I'm not writing it like, he was a great man and he did great things. And over time, people started thinking he's God. For me, he is Bhagwan, he is an avatar, and I want to write him as an avatar. I don't want, because when you write stories like that, I am prepared. जब बच्चे ये magic show देखते हैं ना, they don't know what the trick is. They want to know that it's performed very well. So as you grow up, you know what the tricks are. Maybe you see some YouTube videos. So when आप जब book खरीदते हो, आप जब film की ticket खरीदते हो, you're already half a fan. You're not going inside there to get disappointed. You
Correct.
want to be entertained by the book or the movie. So आप half fan already ho. So you just have to meet that expectation. So when an author writes them as great men, I'm willing to jump through all the hoops. I've seen these tricks. I know how they are. I want to see how well the author executes them. I am your fan. I want you to succeed. But the one hoop I cannot jump is when in the end you say that, ये बहुत बड़ा आदमी था, he did great things. Over time, he became God. That one I can't jump. So,
नो
there
सो
is some.
सो ये हमने ऑनेस्टली रंजीत हमने देखा है कि आजकल लोग जब एंशियंट इवेंट्स को रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं, रिपैकेज करते हैं, तो देयर इज दिस नीड टू रैशनलाइज एवरीथिंग, टू लुक एट इट
Yes.
फ्रॉम द लेंस ऑफ कि भाई ये है कि भाई ये तो ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है, राइट? विद आवर करंट अंडरस्टैंडिंग मे बी वी हैव लॉस्ट
Yeah.
सम विजडम, राइट? सो वी कांट अंडरस्टैंड सम इवेंट्स और some situations or some characteristics, and then we try to put a rational justification to them, right? And
Yes.
that is when probably these things people start doing, you know, maybe this Chandra kaise ho sakte hain, maybe somebody was very influential and he said I am a descendant of moon, he looked at the sky and called himself Chandravanshi. So these kind of explanations you hear often, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this was the difference between Tulsidas, right? He did not
True.
try to rationalize. He is full
Correct.
devotion, and that
Yeah.
is why his book stands out. His poetry
Yeah.
stands out compared to any other. And typically, if you pick up any Ritikal people, any kavi from the Ritikal era, जिनके लिए श्री कृष्ण was everything,
Yes.
राइट? आप गीत
Yeah.
गोविंद ले लो, आप चैतन्य महाप्रभु ले लो, मीरा ले लो. So उनका जो पर्सपेक्टिव है, they didn't try to rationalize, right? They went all in and they said मैं भक्त हूँ, आप भगवान हैं. और वो भक्ति रस जो है वो एक अलग तरीके से निकल के आता है. So I am looking forward to your work, and I would hope that you write more. One question that I was asked to ask you, and this is more about again what next kind of question, that you had written about Shakuni, and that story had come out really well, and there are a lot of fans of that story already. The question is there more about Shakuni that you plan to write, or is like the way you are writing a full length novel on Parashuram, Bhagwan Parashuram, are you looking at writing a full length book on Shakuni? Or that is something that is not in your mind and I am putting the seed in your mind? If that, then maybe you can give me a credit for it later when you actually do publish it.
No, you're definitely putting the idea into my head. I do remember a review on Amazon where somebody did ask me to write a book on Shakuni. As of now, I'm committed to finishing part 2 of Bhagavan Parashurama's story. I'm almost done. Once that is done, maybe I can, I have to see how the first book goes in the first place. Once that is done, I can definitely look at this, because it's after writing the short story on Shakuni that I found out there is a temple in Kerala which is, dedicated to Shakuni, which is very impressive.
There is a temple in Kerala which is dedicated to Duryodhan also.
Duryodhan
We have
also.
done a temple tales story on that temple. Some old lady
Ah.
offered him water and something like that. There is a story.
True. Maybe you should check this temple out too.
Yeah, I will probably include it in our next series, next temple tale series. So Shakuni,
Thank you for putting this in
why I
your
think
mind. I will try and think about it.
no, I think because the way, like, we have a lot of fan fiction around Karn, we have a lot of fan fiction around Shakuni also. I think
Yes.
after Karn, he would probably be the second in line with about a character जिसके बारे में बहुत ज्यादा myth building करी गई है कि वो अपने फैमिली की हड्डियों की बनी हुई पासे से खेला, and they ignore the facts कि like Luke was there who went for this entire mission, diplomatic mission or anti-diplomatic mission, whatever you call it. Then you have all his brothers and their children fighting in Mahabharat war, being killed at the hands of Bhim, Sahadev and all.
Yeah.
लोगों को उससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. शकुनी को एक केव में बंद किया गया था. भीष्म was a bad guy. भीष्म ने द्रौपदी cursed the entire Gandhar. That is why वहां पे आज भी टेररिज्म चल रहा है. Sorry, Gandhari cursed the entire region of Afghanistan. So I'm saying that is a fascinating character to actually explore. And maybe my understanding of Shakuni from Mahabharat is that he genuinely cared for Duryodhan, and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
whatever things he has been blamed for were the things that Duryodhan asked him to do. And
Yeah.
sometimes he resisted, sometimes he
Yes.
said, okay, what you are doing, because whenever he used to resist, Duryodhan would say, I am committing suicide.
Yeah.
And if you are a mama and your banja is trying to commit suicide,
Uh,
like every time you say no to him, you would probably not say no that often. And then there was a incident, and why I believe so is like after the entire Rajsui Yagya, there is
hmm.
this couple of chapters dedicated to the conversation between Duryodhan and Shakuni. Not many people in my most of the retellings don't even show those
Yes.
conversations. But it starts with Duryodhan saying, I am dying of jealousy and I can't
Yes.
win the war the way Arjuna did or
Hmm.
Bhim did. What do I do? I am feeling I'll burn to death. And then Shakuni says, maybe I can find an easier way, right? And then after Ghosh Yatra, Shakuni in fact tells
Yes.
Duryodhan, why are you fighting? You should not fight. These guys tried to save you. They are good people. They
Correct.
want good for you. These are literally Shakuni's word. And if you tell somebody, modern, whoever has the understanding without going through the unabridged version, they won't believe it.
Yeah.
लोगों को लगेगा ही नहीं कि शकुनी ने ऐसा बोला होगा, कि शकुनी was the mastermind who spoiled Duryodhan to do the things that he did. And
Yeah.
then there is another fascinating thing I come across very often कि लोग बोलते हैं कर्ण fell into bad company.
No.
और मैं
Karan
बोलता हूं
was the
कि यार
bad.
एक बात बताओ कि एक 14 साल का बच्चा है, वो एक
हाँ.
कोई 30-32 साल के अंकल के साथ हैंग अराउंड करने लगता है, एंड देन दिस
Hmm.
14-year-old kid grows up to become a bad guy. आप कभी ये
Yes.
बोलोगे क्या कि इस बच्चे ने उस अंकल को बिगाड़ दिया? कभी नहीं
Correct.
बोलोगे,
उनको
राइट?
पता नहीं ना कि अंकल है. I mean, they don't show you
हाँ,
the age
लोगों
difference
को
at all. No. They all keep showing
and
Karna as a very young guy. They don't show him as much elder to Duryodhan and Yudhishthir.
So I'm saying that is very important to basically write more about these characters, write more
Yes.
about this. And in fact, Deepak ko bhi main, during one of the Kahi Suni sessions, I was telling Deepak that if there is a lot of work being done on Draupadi and most of it is myth building around Draupadi, maybe
Yes.
we should write more work on Draupadi rather than saying कि द्रौपदी के बारे में बहुत कुछ लिखा जा चुका है, हम किसी और के बारे में लिखते हैं. यू शुड राइट मोर कि अगर एक इतना पाइल है अगर मिथ वालों का, तो आपका पाइल उससे ऊपर होना चाहिए, so that when people start reading them they will find कि there is more work which is more honest to the original and they would know better stories, write stories. Like परशुराम पे भी, भगवान परशुराम पे भी बहुत कहानियां हैं और बहुत रिसेंट बुक्स भी आई हैं. एक ग्राफिक नॉवेल भी रिसेंटली आया है, आई डोंट नो मैनी वुड हैव सीन इट. So that character suddenly has picked up prominence. I think few years back, not many people were talking about Bhagwan Parashuram, and
Correct.
nowadays people are showing interest. So it's a good thing. People are talking about these characters, and people are showing interest in these stories. I think
Yes.
Vineet Agrawal has written a book on Parashuram. Then
Yes.
there
Yes.
was some other book on Bhagwan Parashuram. Somebody was showing me at Padega India. Oh, from Padega India.
That's
एक चीज याद आई. Buy the book, Arya. I will post the link of Padega India on in the comments and in the description of this video. So after watching this, you can probably click on that link and buy the book and read this story by Ranjith. This is the last story in the book. And I was being told in the last session by Kavita ji that Shivaji has broken it into dharma, arth, kama, moksha, that order. So your story tackles to the last part of it, the moksha
Yes.
bit of the चार पुरुषार्थ. So Ranjit ji, हम लोग end की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं. So if you have anything to add, last remarks, something, please go ahead.
Okay. I would request people to read more, to encourage our writers more. There are people who are trying to write good stories, who are trying to set the narrative straight. It's Draupadi is not always a victim. Karna is not always the great hero that you think he is. There is a different perspective. This perspective is true to our scriptures. And whether you believe it or not, I think you should read it to see where it is coming from. So one such endeavor is Arya. We have stayed faithful to the original. So please read it. Please let us know whether you liked it or not. we need a lot more writers and a lot more readers of this stuff that we are writing, concerned with our Puranas, our scriptures, our Itihas. So your encouragement matters. And as long as we have people like Gauravji and Sutradhar, we're so happy that you've supported us so much for our book. You've given us so much of publicity. You've got all the authors in front talking about this. It's a good thing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sutradhar and Gauravji. Thank you so much.
So, Dhanyavad Ranjit ji for giving us your time and talk about
Happy to.
Arya and the future work that you are working with. Before we close this session, one announcement for our listeners and our audience. Next session of Kaisuni is tomorrow, and this session is going to be a very interesting session. This is with Moni Deepa Day. She is an author who has recently written a book about temples, why temples in Himachal look like the temples in Bengal. And it's going to be a very fascinating session because the way we have temple tales, which are mostly the stories about the temples, the Puranic and the Aitihasic stories about the temple. This session would be more about the stories the temples tell. When you look at a temple, the architecture, the way they look, the way the crafts has been created around them, what stories they tell. And she has already sent me a lot of pictures that she wants to show during the session. So I invite you all to join tomorrow 7 p.m. Another session with Moni Deepa Day. It's called Temple Tales. It's about the stories the temples tell. In the end, buy the book, read more. As Ranjit ji said, try to read the unabridged versions of the books, the scriptures, because one thing I can guarantee, once you start reading them, you will get sucked more into it because that is how interesting these literature are. We don't need to do much around it. आप पढ़ना स्टार्ट करिए, पहला चैप्टर पढ़िए, आपको बाकी के चैप्टर ऑटोमेटिकली आप पढ़ना चाहेंगे. Don't buy 10 books, buy the first book. I'm sure you will end up buying the 10th book also at some point in your life, maybe within a year. So, Dhanyavad Ranjit ji, and thank you everyone
Thank you
who
so much
stayed
for
with
having
us. See you again tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye-bye.